Good morning, everyone. Welcome to this week's Three Things You Need to Know Q&A. I'm Pam Jacobson. For those of you who don't know me, I am board certified in functional medicine. I work with clients all over the country, helping them optimize their health. And I also am the Chief Wellness Officer for a company called Level 10 Health, where I have created a product line and helped them implement wellness programs that they also deliver to clients around the country. So I would recommend for any of you out there that aren't already on the Healing Sanctuary, which is my main business Facebook page, as well as the Level 10 Health Facebook page. I would, there's no obligation. I would sign up for both of those. There's really great ongoing information. The Level 10 Health page, we just launched a recipe, like a cooking show program that's been very well received. So I encourage you all to sign up for those. I want to just disclaim right from the outset that I am not an MD, though I'm very well trained in functional medicine, Chinese medicine. I have a background in conventional nursing. I've been in my own healthcare practice for the last 20 years and was in conventional medicine practice prior to that. However, nothing I'm saying to you today should be misconstrued as medical advice. So let's get started. Three things you need to know. The format of the Q&A is that during the week, I will stay on top of what's trending in health and wellness and bring that information to you in a sifted down fashion that it can be delivered quickly, that you can walk away with some salient information that you can then use right away. So without further ado, let's get started. Three things you need to know. Number one, know your risks as you are beginning to return to work, to school, to society in general. There was an excellent article out in the last week or so by an immunologist who actually is specifically focused in the area of viral transmission, and especially viral transmission, human to animal to human and so forth, has a lot of experience in this area. Though he is not in agreement with our rush to reopen things, he recognizes that it is happening all over the country already. The economy needs to get going. We need to get moving. And so he put together this excellent article talking about what it takes to get infected with the COVID virus and what you can do as you start to return to your normal daily activities to protect yourself. So I felt that it was excellent information. I have posted his website here in the chat for you, and I'll also post the article itself on the Healing Sanctuary Facebook page. You can check that out later. So essentially, what he says is that it is dose plus time that determines infection. So in other words, you have to have enough exposure, enough viral load in order to become infected. And we do have some ideas around what that is. And it appears that in the COVID virus situation, you don't need an extreme amount of viral load. But it depends on how much you're exposed to over what period of time. So dose plus time, or exposure to the virus times the amount of time that you're in that setting. So how much for how long? He talks about the types of environments where you are going to potentially run into the issue of dose and time. And these will be environments that are enclosed spaces. So he talked about a grocery store, for instance. Many of us it's the one place we all probably do have to go to on a relatively regular basis. And many of us are worried about that. And he talks about how that's a relatively low risk environment compared to, say, going to church, or if you work in a call center, or you've been invited to a birthday party. And the difference being that in a grocery store, you're usually in a very large amount of square footage with lots of airflow around you. The density of people is minimized, and the amount of time you're there is relatively short compared to these other scenarios. Let's say a church, for instance, which is a much smaller enclosed space. You're usually sitting densely packed next to other individuals. There's a lot of exposure activity, right? Things like talking, singing, yelling, like at a sporting event, coughing and sneezing that go on in those environments that, in any of those situations are aerosolizing potentially virus into the air. So a densely packed environment, an enclosed environment, one where there's not ample airflow space around you, and someplace where you're going to spend an extended period of time, like an hour or more. So those would be the kind of environments that you would want to avoid where you can. Question to ask yourself if you're trying to decide, am I going to go to or do this thing, is how many people are going to be there? How much airflow is there around me? In other words, how close will I be to those people? How large is the space I'm going to be in? How much room is there between me and others? And how long will I be there? So if any of those answers are, showing you to be in a high risk environment, then you may want to reconsider. If you find yourself in a situation where you don't have a choice, my son, for instance, works in a call center. And though he's working at home right now, at some point he's going to have to go back to work. So that is a very, very high risk environment. And in fact, one thing I love about Aaron's article is he actually gives some of the specific scenarios that occurred where there were large outbreaks. And he talks about like a meat packing plant, for instance, which is a cold environment. It's a densely packed environment. It's an enclosed environment. And just ripe for extreme viral exposure. One of them was a church choir situation, and the other one was a call center. So, and he shows some incidences of restaurant, exposure in restaurants. So I think the article is well worth a read. It's long, but it is, I think it's very informative. But essentially, what he boils it down to is it's really how many people are going to be there, how much airflow is around me, how long am I going to be potentially in the exposure. And if you're in a work setting that puts you at a higher risk, talk to your HR manager about what the phasing in process is. Many companies, have been given the criteria for how to safely reopen. There is a lot of merit to wearing the mask, not so much that it's protecting you as much as you are protecting others from what you are putting out. You're speaking, you're breathing, you're potentially coughing and sneezing. So when you're out, do wear if everyone wore their face covering, we would all be protecting each other. So important to continue to do that, because what Aaron points out in the article, what he opens the article with, is the fact that he's not real keen on the idea of the country opening up so quickly, because the numbers of cases in the U.S. are actually going up still. But it appears that it's flattened, because New York, where the biggest issue has been with the virus, as it's getting a containment on the cases, it makes it appear that the numbers in the U.S. are flattening, when the reality is, if you separated New York out, the numbers are continuing to increase in the U.S. And, like all viruses, when we look at things statistically, there will continue to be a back curve or an uprising, and potentially a resurgence in the winter months when it gets colder. So important to understand these things, but for me, important that you all understand how to minimize your risk. So, really avoid those environments where you can, obviously wear your face protection, and understand that surfaces also are potentially high risk. And it appears that probably one of the biggest high risk environments is restrooms, public restrooms. So, wash your hands, wear your gloves, your face masks, and, protect yourself. But at this point, we are going to open up and get back to business as usual in a lot of cases. So now you kind of have some ideas about how you can minimize your risk. Okay. Any questions that you have, whether it is on this subject or you just have a question that you want me to answer, feel free to post it in the chat. And if you don't see the chat, then perhaps you're not logged into YouTube, which I believe you have to be in order to ask questions or be in the chat. So anyway, feel free to ask questions. If you're watching this as a recording later, which I know many people do, I recognize that 9 a.m. on a Wednesday is a time when a lot of people are working. Then if you have questions, you can reach out to me. I did list my email, pamjacobson@aol.com, and you can call me 714-730-2233, and I'm happy to answer your questions. If there's a topic that you really want to hear about, you can also reach out and let me know, or you can post it on the Facebook page. There's lots of ways to get in touch with me if you've got questions. So point number 2, there was also an article, a study out this past week in a peer-reviewed journal about vitamin D. And we're still on the subject of COVID for these first couple of points today, because it is top of mind and it is what's currently trending and it is what people want to know about. And on the health and wellness side, I recognize that many of my clients are working to get their lives back to some semblance of normal and getting out into public more. And so I really want to do what I can to help you all protect yourself. And the article was about vitamin D. There was a small study done looking at recent testing for COVID infected patients. And what they did was looked at a group of patients that were known to be infected with the virus and looked simultaneously at their current vitamin D level. And in 100% of the cases, the vitamin D level was below the acceptable norm. So first of all, what I would say is you should know what your vitamin D level is. You can get it easily tested in your blood. If you need help with that, you can reach out to me. I'm happy to give you a lab order to get that done. You would like that level to be above 50 somewhere. I really have I tell my patients between 60 and 80 is ideal. But if you're above 50, good for you. But you should know what your level is. The reality is that 90%, there's an estimation that 90% of the world's population is actually deficient in vitamin D. And the reason for that is going to be really two. Lack of sun exposure, which is really our only real primary source of vitamin D, and using sunscreen. So many of us are indoors all day long. And when we do go outdoors, we're so concerned about skin cancer that we put on sunscreen. And so a huge percentage of the population of the world is low in vitamin D. And there are those at this point that are theorizing that one of the reasons that we're seeing such an impact on the whole world's immune response to this virus is that our vitamin D levels are low in most of us. So what do we need to do? How can we fix that problem and protect ourselves? So there's a couple of things. It's not easy to get vitamin D in your diet unless you're eating the only plant food that has vitamin D in it is mushrooms. So certainly if you eat a wide variety of mushrooms or use mushroom products, I know in the Level 10 Health protein formula I developed for them, there's a mushroom complex in there. But mushrooms would be the only real plant source. There are some animal sources, mostly fish like salmon, mackerel. Some of your fatty fishes have some levels of vitamin D in them. But it was recognized early on that vitamin D is a difficult thing to get. So there are some fortified foods like milk, for instance, where vitamin D is added. I don't recommend that. In fact, I tell my patients mostly to avoid dairy. So I would say it's just easy to supplement with it, right? Take vitamin D on a daily basis. That's why knowing your level is an important number, so that then you can determine or work with someone like me to determine how much vitamin D do you really need. But let's assume for a moment that you don't really know your level and you want to be taking vitamin D, which I highly recommend given the current situation that we're in. And so my recommendation for you would be 5,000 international units of vitamin D per day. Vitamin D it's much more easy to be deficient, which is why about 90% of us are. Much, much more difficult to have too much vitamin D, despite discussion and concern amongst especially conventional medical professionals. Vitamin D toxicity is actually very rare and extremely difficult to create. So what I would say is 5,000 units is a very safe amount. But for many of us during this COVID crisis, I'm recommending my patients even use up to 10,000 units a day and maybe cycle on and off of that every 30 days, go back down to 5 for a little bit and then up to 10. If you know your level, then you can monitor it that way. But vitamin D, super critical, especially right now. But it is something that most of us should be supplementing all the time. I particularly like a liquid form of vitamin D that can be absorbed in the mucous membranes in the mouth into the bloodstream versus something that I have to swallow, such as a pill that goes into my digestive system. So information for you on vitamin D. You do want to take it with vitamin K and maybe even magnesium that will assist with good absorption vitamin D. Many of the vitamin D supplements today have vitamin K in them and maybe a little magnesium as well to help with absorption. Again, if you need help getting access to vitamin D, I'm happy to do that for you. We have an online fulfillment center that gives us access to all of the major nutraceutical manufacturers out there, and I can help you get access to a really nice liquid vitamin D if you just reach out and let me know that you need that. So vitamin D, super critical, need to be using it every day, not just now during COVID, but for the rest of your life. Most of us don't get out in the sun enough. Sun exposure, about 10 to 15 minutes a day in sunlight, but it has to be, at a specific time during the day. There actually is an app that you can download on your phone that will track the sun in your particular area and let you know when the optimal time for vitamin D exposure would happen from the sun. So at any rate, for what it's worth. Okay, so moving on, point number 3 today is water. This has been a big top of mind topic for me personally, but really from a longevity health standpoint, many of us don't necessarily recognize how critical the proper level of hydration is. And again, particularly now during this COVID crisis. So I wanted to spend a couple of minutes talking about hydration, water, how much, and so forth, so that you could recheck yourself in that area, because I certainly found for myself personally that I was not doing as good of a job as I could or should be with my hydration. I get busy. I'm not a person who particularly feels thirsty, and so I didn't have my own internal reminder to drink water, and would find myself, especially during this time that I'm working from home, not really keeping up very well with my hydration. So water, 60% of your body is comprised of water. So it only stands to reason that if we are not managing that on a daily basis efficiently, we could really create some significant health issues for ourselves. We lose water throughout our day from talking, from sweating, from just regular body processes like urination and bowel movements. And so we are constantly losing water. So we have to also then constantly be looking for ways to replace water. Certainly drinking water is one way to replace it. Eating a hydrating diet, fruits and vegetables in our diet, that the foods contain a lot of water. Those are really going to be the key ways to manage your hydration. I find it very helpful to use a reminder, right? There's lots of hydration reminder apps that you can download to your phone that will give you an audible signal that will calculate for you how much water you should drink each day. And it's a way for you to kind of keep track of what you're doing. And I find that really helpful for me, and something I would highly recommend. So how much water do you need? It was interesting as I was doing my research, there's actually no scientific study or evidence that is clearly able to unequivocally say you must have this much water. And the reason is because we're all different sizes, different activity levels, different dietary practices. And so we all need varying levels of hydration depending on many of those things, whether it's a hot climate that you live in and so forth. So I think the general rule of thumb is 50% of your body weight in ounces of water a day. So if you weigh, say, 100 pounds, then you would need a minimum of 50 ounces of water a day. I tell my patients usually, 2 liters of water a day would be your minimum, and somewhere between 2 and 3 liters of water is kind of what your target should be. Again, the water apps consider your activity level, your weight, your height, I think they ask you if you live in a hot climate and so forth, and they try to calculate, but it comes out to roughly somewhere between 2 and 3 liters of water a day. One thing I do want to say, though, is it is possible to overhydrate, and that is a dangerous situation. So you need to be very careful to not over drink water. The rule of thumb there is you should not be drinking more than a liter of water in an hour. And so in activities, for instance, where you may be very thirsty and drinking high amounts of water, you do have to be careful. Too much water deletes, some important chemical functions in the body, and it is actually a life-threatening situation. So not common, obviously not common, but if you're going to get on a water kick, I don't want you drinking like gallons of water a day or going on some, water challenge where everybody has to drink a gallon of water in an hour. It's not a good idea. So somewhere between 2 and 3 liters of water a day. Use a timer or reminder system to help yourself. Get your favorite water bottle that you carry around with you. Those are some ideas for how to stay hydrated. And the quality of your water is also really, really important. I am very good friends with a water engineer who now actually creates water systems. And it was the system I used in my office and the system I use at home that filters my water. So I think the key here is that if we're going to be drinking water regularly, we want that water to be as clean as possible. Unfortunately, what we do know about city water, tap water, is that it is full of toxins and chemicals, fluoride, chlorine, and so forth. And of course, is not something that you want to be putting in your body on a regular basis. So what I would recommend is using filtered water. You can use filtering pitchers. You can certainly buy filtered water. Where you can afford to do that, I would suggest either an under-counter water filtering system. I will put in the chat notes today. Eco Waterhouse is my friend's business. I happen to think that he is brilliant when it comes to his ideas around water, and his system does everything. It filters out all the bad stuff, puts back in the good stuff, alkalizes, ionizes, you name it. And I just think that he's been very smart about looking at all as well. So hydration, super important to get your hydration. 60% of your body is water. So use a timer reminder, 2 to 3 liters of water a day. Make sure it's filtered. So those are the 3 things you need to know, right? Questions that you have, again, if you're watching this recorded later, you can reach out to me with your questions. Some of the questions that I'm seeing here online, is there a particular type of vitamin D I would recommend? There's several manufacturers out there. I really like Orthomolecular's liquid vitamin D. I find it really easy to use. My patients don't complain about the taste. Again, what I recommend to them is 1 drop of liquid vitamin D from Orthomolecular has 1,000 units in it, 1 drop. And I have them put 5 drops under their tongue, hold it in their mouth to a count of 30, swish it around, and then swallow it. However, there's other brands out there that are equally as good. Again, remember that liquid vitamin D has K in it, but you do need some vitamin K and oftentimes magnesium to help with best absorption of vitamin D. Another question here was about vitamin D was what foods. As I said before, it's not an easy thing to get in the diet. So vitamin D really comes from the sun. It comes as a vitamin. It hits your skin. There's a complex conversion process that goes on to actually eventually get converted to a hormone. It's fat soluble, it's stored in the liver. You will not be able to get the levels you need strictly from diet, although plant sources would be things like mushrooms, animal sources, salmon, mackerel, some of your fatty fish give you some levels of vitamin D, but you really do need to essentially supplement with it. So someone asked again about the original topic that I was talking about, know your risks as far as returning to work. The question was, I'm going to be returning to work next week in a very dense environment. What do I suggest? Again, you guys, I recognize that we may be in situations where we don't have a lot of options, right? If our employer is having us return to work, but I do think that you can make it known that you have concerns. You can talk to your human resources department about the plan for the return, and are they going to be creating opportunities for people to be more distanced from one another? I know a friend of mine's office is returning next week, and they're returning in what they call pods, where there will only be a certain amount of people in the building at any one given time. They'll be spread out from one another, and all of the hours and days that people are working will be staggered to allow for this, more distance amongst the people who are in the building. And I do think that that's the recommendation for a lot of employers. So many of you should have those types of return to work plans in place. And if not, then I would, certainly talk to your human resources manager about that. So somebody was asking, what is the Waterminder app that I recommend? I think the one I use is called Waterminder. Most of them are free. I just find one, they're pretty easy to use. I don't know that there's one specifically that I would recommend. I think just get one that you don't have to, spend any money on. And really all you're looking for is something that reminds you every so often to drink water and gives you a way to track it so that, when you're halfway through the day and you can't remember how much water you've drank, you've got, mine kind of counts it down. So I know how many ounces I've got left to go. So I did have one off topic, sort of off topic question, wanting to know kind of what my thoughts were about, returning to work or reopening. My local business is an acupuncture office, and someone here asked, was I planning to reopen my physical location? And at this point, but for other reasons, not necessarily because of COVID, my lease in my physical office was going to be up at the end of July, and I was looking at moving to a different location anyway. So I will not be reopening my office in Tustin. That's just for acupuncture. My main part of the work I do is through video and phone with clients all over the country. But for an acupuncture office, I don't intend to reopen my physical location at this time. And I will likely, given this natural break with my lease ending, I'll likely wait until, more toward the end of the year when I can see what will happen as the rest of the world gets back to, more normal work settings and social settings, and see what happens with the virus. And I'll make a decision at that point. But I do agree that it's time for us to start to tippy toe out there and look at what's going to happen when we start to open things back up. But I personally will be doing everything I can to protect myself and protect others from me and really lower my potential exposure risk. You can get testing now, guys. I mean, relatively easy. Most urgent care centers are able to do the nasal swab, which is the test that tells you whether or not you are infected. Many workplaces will be offering that testing to employees as well. And then for those of you that feel like you might have already had the virus and you want to know if you've got antibodies, I can actually even order those tests now for my patients. So if you need an order or you're looking to get tested for antibodies, which all that means is that you've been exposed and had the virus, I'm happy to order that for you. As far as current infection, you still have to do that through, an emergency room setting or an urgent care setting. But I do believe that for most of us now, we do have access to that type of testing more readily. So if you're concerned, certainly reach out and do that. So that's it for questions. Again, please reach out, post this Q&A if you've got questions, or if there is a topic you want to know more about. I'm happy to bring that up on my next show. I will see you all next Wednesday at 9 a.m. for 3 things you need to know.